Hello friends, welcome to SJ's classes. It's the poem Lycidas written by John Milton that we will discuss today. It's a lengthy poem and that's why I have divided the discussion into two parts. It's the first part that you will get today. Before we start reading the poem, let me give you a very brief introduction to the poet as well as the poem. John Milton, he was born in London in 1608. He was an English poet, pamphleteer. Pamphleteer means a person who or a writer of pamphlets, and they usually took a particular stand on some sort of social issue. And he was also a historian, and he is considered to be the most significant English author after William Shakespeare. He was educated at St. Paul's School, which was a prestigious English public school back then, and later at Christ College, Cambridge, where he began to write poetry in Latin, Italian, and English, and also prepared to enter the clergy to become a priest. So he was well versed in these languages Latin, Italian, and English. You also find this influence very much in the poem that we are about to discuss today. But after his university days, he abandoned his plans to join the priesthood and spent the next 6 years in his father's country home in Buckinghamshire, following a rigorous course of independent study to prepare for a career as a poet. And it is during this particular period of private study that Milton composed a number of poems, including On the Morning of Christ's Nativity, on Shakespeare, L'Allegro and Il Penseroso, which can be translated as the cheerful man and the pensive man, and also the pastoral elegy, Lycidas, the poem that we are to discuss today. In 1645, he published his first volume of poetry, and that anthology was titled Poems of Mr. John Milton, both English and Latin. And much of these poems, which were included in this particular collection, were written before he was even 20 years old. And this collection included poems written in various genres like psalm, paraphrase, sonnet, masque, pastoral elegy, ode, epigram, and even obituary poems, denoting death of people. You might have probably heard John Milton's name in connection with the epic Paradise Lost, and that is his best known work, and it came out in 1667. And this particular epic chronicles Satan's temptation of Adam and Eve and their expulsion from Eden. So it has a story based on the scripture called Bible. This particular epic poem, which was written in 10 volumes, is widely regarded as his masterpiece and one of the greatest epic poems in world literature. Together with Paradise Regained, which he wrote in 1671, which is based on the New Testament story of Christ temptation by Satan in the desert, and also Samson Agonist, which was written in 1671. And this particular work is based on the Old Testament story of Samson and Delilah. So, with these three works, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and Samson Agonist, now, these works confirmed Milton's reputation as one of the greatest English poets. He wrote in different languages. I said earlier that he was well versed in languages like Latin, Greek, and Italian, and so he wrote in all these languages, and therefore he achieved international renown within his lifetime. One of his other celebrated works is Areopagitica, which was written in 1644, and this was written in condemnation of pre-publication censorship. It was against censorship that he wrote this particular work, and it is among history's most influential and impassioned defenses of freedom of speech and freedom of press. He has also made some significant contribution to English language and literature by introducing new words, especially which were coined from Latin and ancient Greek to English, and also by employing unrhymed verse to poetry, which is also called as free verse. Milton, as a believer, he was a Puritan who believed in the authority of the Bible, and he opposed religious institutions like the Church of England and the monarchy with which it was entwined. As we read the poem Lycidas, we also understand that it's not just a pastoral elegy, it's not a poem that mourns someone, but also it's a scathing remark against the kind of religious setup that they had back then, especially against the Church of England. He also wrote pamphlets on radical topics like freedom of the press, as I said earlier, and he supported Oliver Cromwell in the English Civil War and was also probably present at the beheading of Charles I. Milton wrote official publications for Cromwell's government, so he was also a civil servant. He worked for Cromwell's government. John Milton died in England in November 1674. Now, let me give you a brief introduction to the poem that we are about to discuss. This elegy, which is titled Lycidas, was composed in the form of a pastoral elegy. You might want to know what a pastoral elegy is. You might already know what a pastoral elegy is, but let's see what it is. The poet and the persons he writes about are all treated as shepherds or shepherdesses, and they or the poet describes life in the hillsides and pastures, probably set in the ancient Greece. So this elegy is also a pastoral elegy, and it was written in 1637 to lament the accidental death by drowning of Milton's friend Edward King. So it's for his friend, uh, who was his fellow, who was his friend at Cambridge University, Edward King. It's for him. It's to mourn his death that he has written this particular elegy. This poem first appeared in a 1638 collection of elegies. This collection commemorated the death of Edward King. As I said earlier, he was a college mate of Milton's at Cambridge who drowned when his ship sank off the coast of Wales in August 1637. So it's in 1637 that Edward King died, and in 1637 he wrote this particular elegy. But it appeared in this particular collection, which was written to commemorate the memories of Edward King. The poem can be divided into six sections. The first part is a prologue, and then you have four main parts, and then you have the epilogue. It's in the prologue that Milton invokes the muse, which is a tradition as far as pastoral elegy is concerned, and he also explains the reasons for writing the poem. In the second section, he describes the type of life Lycidas and the poet had at Cambridge. Of course, this description is being made from the point of view of shepherds and their life on countryside in countryside. In the third session, Milton describes a procession of mourners lamenting Lycidas' death. The fourth section becomes an escape from intolerable reality into a lovely world of make believe reality. In the fifth section, Milton expresses his belief in immortality. The epilogue, which is the final part, brings us back to the portal images again and refers indirectly to the Greek pastoral poets. The conclusion points to a new determination both to face life hopefully and to rise up to greater poetic achievements. So, this is a brief introduction to uh, the poet as well as the poem. As I said earlier, this poem, it's a bit lengthy one. It's written by a person, a poet. It was written by a poet who was well versed in different languages, especially Latin, and he was also, very much fluent with Greek mythology as well as Roman mythology. So you find numerous references, allusions, uh, numerous poetical devices being employed here and there. So please focus on the verses. So let's discuss the poem. Let's read the very first part, which is, as I said earlier, the prologue. It's in the prologue that he invokes the muses as well as he gives the reason behind writing this particular elegy or pastoral elegy. Yet once more, O ye laurels, and once more, ye myrtles brown, with ivy never sere, I come to pluck your berries harsh and crude, and with forced fingers rude shatter your leaves before the mellowing ear. Yet once more, O ye laurels, and once more, ye myrtles brown. Milton begins this elegy in the traditional way, in the traditional mode by praising or calling on myrtles and laurels, which are traditional plants used to crown heroes. And as I said earlier, this is the prologue part, and it's in this prologue that he explains the reason behind the composition of this poem. And also, it is in this prologue that he invokes the muses. Muses in Greek mythology, they are goddess of the arts and sciences. So Milton invokes laurels and myrtles, and he tells them that I come to pluck your berries harsh and crude, and with forced fingers rude shatter your leaves before the mellowing ear. So the poet says to the laurels and the myrtles, which he addressed in the first two lines, he tells them that he has come to pluck its berries violently off its branches before they have ripened. The mellowing ear refers to the ripening season. He says, the poet or the speaker says, I have come to pluck you before your ripening season. Let's also note the rhythm that he has incorporated into these lines by, incorporating rhymes, and rhymes we have seer, ear, crude, rude, seer, ear, dear. You have such rhyming words placed towards the end to bring about a rhythmic as well as musical effect. And he has also employed a technique called apostrophe, which is addressing an absent or imaginary person or thing. Here, in this particular verse, he addresses the myrtles and laurels. Therefore, you can say that he has incorporated the technique of apostrophe into this particular lines. Bitter constraint and sad occasion, dear, compels me to disturb your season due. So it's this particular sad occasion that has compelled him to disturb the season of myrtles and laurels, the berries that you can find on myrtles and laurels. So he's going to tell us about the reason for plucking the berries or the reason behind writing this particular poem. Let's see what that reason is. For Lycidas is dead, dead ere his prime, young Lycidas, and hath not left his peer. Who would not sing for Lycidas? He knew himself to sing, and build the lofty rhyme. He must not float upon his watery bier, unwept and welter to the parching wind, without the meed of some melodious tear. So let's look at the reason behind the composition of this poem or this elegy. The speaker says, the poet says, for Lycidas is dead, dead ere his prime. So this is the reason that has compelled him to pluck the berries from laurels and myrtles. This is the reason why he composes his poem or this particular poem, because Lycidas is dead and he has died before attaining maturity. He has died far too young. Young Lycidas and hath not left his peer. Peer means an equal or friend. So what the poet means here is that he has not left anyone who is as good as himself, someone whom you can equate with Lycidas. So he hath not left his peer. Who would not sing for Lycidas? This is the kind of rhetoric. This is a kind of rhetorical question that Milton makes here. Who would not sing for Lycidas? Which means that anybody would write a poem or an elegy for their dead friend Lycidas. He knew himself to sing. Lycidas was himself a poet and built the lofty rhyme. So he used to write great poems. He must not float upon his watery bier. Bier means a coffin, and watery bier here it means watery tomb. As I said earlier, he drowned to death. That is how he confronted death, and therefore Milton uses the phrase watery bier, watery tomb. He must not float upon his watery bier. And you might have noted this particular technique that Milton has employed here. He omits letters in between. Earlier in the fourth line, sorry, in the fourth line you saw, and with forced fingers in the word forced, he has skipped this particular letter E. And in this particular line, which reads, "He must not float upon his watery bier," he has skipped the letter E in watery, and this is called syncope. It's a technique that you employ so as to, for the sake of rhythm, you dismiss or omit a particular letter so that you can, sing with the rhythm that you have already incorporated into the work. He must not float upon his watery bier, unwept and welter to the parching wind. So parching wind means dry wind, and welter means to move in an uncontrolled way. So he must not be left alone like that. He must not be unmourned. He should be mourned for. His death must be lamented. His death must be mourned. Unwept and welter to the parching wind, without the meed of some melodious tear. Meed means a fitting reward. So he must receive a fitting reward. Lycidas must receive a fitting reward. And as I said earlier, Lycidas in this poem is actually Edward King, his friend at Cambridge. So unwept and welter to the parching wind, without the meed of some melodious tear. And what does the expression melodious tear means? A poem. And he should not be, unwept or unmourned. He must receive a fitting reward. And as far as John Milton is concerned, as he was a great poet, a fitting reward that he can offer to his friend is a melodious tear, which means a poem. So he has explained to us the reason behind the composition of this poem, this pastoral elegy. Now he goes on to invoke the muses. Begin then, sisters of the sacred well, that from beneath the seat of Jove doth spring. Begin and somewhat loudly sweep the spring. So this is the portion where he invokes the muses. Milton writes, "Begin then, sisters of the sacred well." John Milton addresses the 9 muses who are described in Greek mythology. They are the daughters of Zeus, the king of gods, and Mnemosyne, who is regarded as the goddess of memory. So, Zeus, he had 9 daughters with Mnemosyne, who is the goddess of memory, and it is the muses that he invokes in this particular stanza. Begin then, sisters of the sacred well. The sacred well, it must be Agenippe or Hippocrene, which is being described here. These are springs on Mount Helicon, where the muses reside. So the sacred well must either mean Agenippe or Hippocrene. These are springs on Mount Helicon. Mount Helicon is the mountain where these muses reside. Begin then, sisters of the sacred well, that from beneath the seat of Jove doth spring. Now, Jove is Jupiter, the king of gods in Roman mythology, and he is equivalent to Zeus in Greek mythology. So, in Greek mythology, it is Zeus who is the king of gods. As you are aware of the Greek, as you are aware, there are numerous gods in Greek mythology as well as Roman mythology, and Zeus is the king of all the gods, and in Roman mythology it is Jove or Jupiter who is the king of all gods. Begin and somewhat loudly sweep the string. As I said earlier, this is the area or stanza in which he invokes the muses, and he says, "Begin and somewhat loudly sweep the string." Sweep the string here means, play music or inspire me to write poetry. And that is why Milton is invoking these muses. He wants to write poetry. He wants to write a melody. He wants to give a fitting reward to his dead friend. He wants to compose a melodious poem. And that is why he invokes the muses. And he tells them, begin and somewhat loudly sweep the string. Hence, with denial, vain, and coy excuse. So here he says that let me compose this particular poem without any useless denial or provocative excuses. Let me not give any excuses. Let me not, put some useless denial. Let me compose this poem. So please begin, inspire me. So may some gentle muse with lucky words favor my destined urn, and as he passes, turn and bid fair peace be to my sable shroud. So, destined urn. Urn is a vase that contains a person's ashes, and shroud is a cloth that you use to cover a corpse. Sable is black color, and therefore, sable shroud means a black cloth which is used to wrap a corpse, to cover a corpse. So, in these lines, the poet, after invoking the muses, hopes that one day some gentle muse would favor or inspire someone to write a poem about him, just like he is writing at present for Lycidas. So he wishes that someone would write an elegy for him as well, for Milton as well. This is something that even Thomas Gray did in his elegy written in the country's churchyard. He wished some kindred soul would write an elegy for him when he is dead. For we were nursed upon the self same hill, fed the same flock by fountain, shade, and rill. Together both, ere the high lawns appeared, under the opening eyelids of the morn, we drove afield and both together heard, what time the grey fly winds a sultry horn, battening our flocks with the fresh dews of night, off till the star that rose at evening bright toward heaven's descent had sloped his westering veil. So, with the earlier stanza, we came to the end of prologue, and this is the very first stanza, and this is where you get more idea regarding a pastoral elegy. You have imageries from the countryside. You have picture of a perfect countryside being narrated here. You have the shepherds coming in, the shepherd's life being described here and there. So it's from this particular point onwards this becomes a true pastoral elegy. So the poet in the very first line says, for we were nursed upon the self same hill. Both Milton and Lycidas, they grew up in the same countryside. And as far as the countryside that we are talking about is Cambridge. That is where they spent time together. Fed the same flock. They tended to the same flock of sheep and they tended to it by the fountain, shade, and rill. They tended to the sheep, they took care of the sheep beside the fountain, beside a particular water resource, in the shade and rill. Rill is a small stream. Together, both, ere the high lawns appeared, under the opening eyelids of the morn. High lawns here might probably refer to the lawns on top of mountains. And the opening eyelids of the morn in the next line, it is the sunrise that is being metaphorically described. So the poet continues to describe their past. He earlier said that they were nursed upon the self same hill and they tended to the same flock, same group of sheep. And here he says that they used to get up together in the morning to take their sheep out for grazing. Together both the high lawns appeared under the opening eyelids of the morn. Morn means morning. We drove afield. Drove afield is the driving of the herd of sheep that is being referred to. We drove afield and both together heard what time the grey fly winds her sultry horn. Sultry means attractive or alluring. So as morning comes, they hear the sound of a fly, which is a grey fly, which indicates that the sun is up and the temperature is gradually going to rise. Battening our flocks. Battening means fattening or feeding them. Battening our flocks with the fresh dews of night, off till the star that rose at evening bright. And they used to spend time together, uh, perhaps the whole day together at the high lawns, tending to their flock of sheep. And the star that is being described here must be the planet Venus, which is often regarded as the evening star. So they used to spend the whole day together there on the highland lawns, tending to their flock of sheep. Toward heaven's descent had sloped his westering wheel. So again, you have the passage of time being described there. Passing of the sun from east to west, the rising of the star or sun, or as we have the description of Venus being given here, it might be the rising and descending of the star in the sky that is being described here. And westering means to move towards the west. Meanwhile, the rural ditties were not mute. Tempered to the autumn flute, rough satyrs danced, and fauns with cloven heel from the glad sound would not be absent long, and old Demetus loved to hear our song. Meanwhile, the rural ditties means short symbol poems. So meanwhile, the rural ditties were not mute, tempered to the autumn flute. So both Milton and Lycidas they used to compose ditties or short poems to the tune of the autumn flute. Autumn flute is a flute made from the stem of an oat plant. So they used to compose poems and they used to compose this along with the tune of the autumn flute. Tempered to the autumn flute means in tune with. Rough satyrs danced and fauns with cloven heel. So various mythological features are being alluded to here. We have creatures like satyrs and fauns who dance to their tunes. Rough satyrs danced and fauns with cloven heel. From the glad sound would not be absent long, and old Demetus loved to hear our song. Demetus is a character that frequently appeared in pastoral poems. We have in works like Idylls written by Theocritus. Theocritus is the one who developed this particular type of elegy called pastoral elegy. So we have Demetrius in the Idylls written by Theocritus and also in the famous Eclogues written by Virgil. And you also find him in Sidney's Arcadia as a herdsman. So Demetrius is a popular character as far as pastoral elegy is concerned, and Milton in this verse says, "Old Demetrius loved to hear our song." So it's as if everyone loved the poem that were composed by both Milton and Lycidas. But oh, the heavy change now thou art gone. So this is the change that has befallen his life, which has come into Milton's life. And he describes it as a heavy change. And what is that change? Thou art gone, you are dead. Now thou art gone and never must return. So he repeats that phrase. He reiterates the grief that has befallen his life. Thou art gone and never must return. So you have passed away, you have died. Thee shepherd, thee the woods and desert caves, with wild rhyme and the gadding vine overgrown, and all their echoes mourn. So this is another example for apostrophe. Earlier you saw that Milton addressed myrtles and laurels, which were actually absent, and here you have Milton addressing Lycidas. Lycidas is not here; he has passed away. He has died, and he is addressing him in these verse lines. And therefore, this can be treated as another example for apostrophe. The shepherd, you shepherd. So it's in the form of an address, and the shepherd here is Lycidas. And Lycidas is actually his friend Edward King, who passed away. The shepherd, thee the woods and desert caves, with a wild thyme. Wild thyme means a wild plant. And the gadding vine overgrown. Gadding vine overgrown means wine that wanders or creeps aimlessly. and all their echoes mourn. So even the woods and caves which are overgrown with wild thyme or wild plants and vines mourn his death. So even nature takes part in this mourning the death of Lycidas. This is also an example for pathetic fallacy. Pathetic fallacy is a technique in which through the use of which you attribute human emotions to inanimate objects of nature. Here, Milton says that the woods and deserts they lament, they share their echoes, share their mourning, and which means that they are taking part in the lamentation. They are sad. So when you ascribe human emotions to non-living things, inanimate things, and that particular technique is called pathetic fallacy. The willows and the hazel copses green shall now no more be seen, fanning their joyous leaves to thy soft lace. So it's not just the caves and woods that mourn Lycidas' death. The willow trees and hazel trees, these are trees being described here by Milton. So even willow trees and hazel trees too lament his death. And how do they show their lament? How do they convey their mourning? By not fanning their leaves to the joyous tunes or rhythms made by Lycidas. So they don't fan their leaves anymore. They used to do this to Lycidas poems. He used to compose melodious poems, and they used to fan their leaves in response to his poetry, but they don't do it anymore. Shall now no more be seen fanning their joyous leaves to thy soft lace, as killing as the canker to the rose, or ta'en worm to the weanling herds that graze, or frost to flowers that their gay wardrobe wear, when first the white thorn blows, such Lycidas thy laws to shepherds ear. So what you have here is a series of comparisons being made here, as killing as the canker to the rose. Canker is a disease that infests rose plants. Taint worm to the weanling herds that graze means weanling herds means a group of newly weaned animals. Weaned means taken away from their mothers. So a taint worm to the weanling herds that graze means a taint worm, which is a taint worm is an intestinal worm that kills young calves. So worms that kill young calves, or frost flowers that their gay wardrobe wear, frost that kills newly blossomed flowers. And as I said earlier, we have a series of simile here to point out that the death of Lycidas was in fact a great loss to the poet. He narrates to us, how he describes to us how the canker infests rose, how the tainworm kills calves, and also how frost destroys flowers. And that is the kind of loss that Milton feels as of now. Where were ye, nymphs, when the remorseless deep closed over the head of your loved Lycidas? So Milton wonders where the nymphs, nymphs are inferior deities in Greek mythology. So where were these nymphs when Lycidas, whom they loved, drowned in the ocean, which Milton describes as the remorseless deep? So he questions the nymphs, the deities, the inferior deities. Where were you when Lycidas drowned? Lycidas is someone whom you loved. And where were you when he was drowning? And from what we read, we understand that Milton is not happy with their behavior, the behavior of the nymphs. They must have protected him. For neither were ye playing on the steep where your old bards, the famous druids, lie, nor on the shaggy top of Mona high, nor yet where Deva spreads her wizard stream. So earlier, Milton blamed the nymphs for not protecting, taking care of Lycidas. And here again, the poet blames the nymphs by saying that they weren't on at their usual sports. If they were at their usual sports, perhaps they could have saved Lycidas. But they weren't at their usual sports. And which are these usual sports? They were not on the steep, which means the mountain. The mountain should be the one located on the island called Bardsey, where it was rumored that during Milton's time, around 20,000 saints were buried. And you have expressions like old bards, bards means poets, and famous druids. Druids are priests in the pre Roman Celtic cultures, and they were present in various places like Ireland, Wales, England, etc. So, druids are priests. So, usually these nymphs they were present in this particular mountain, which during Milton's time was believed that saints were buried or poets were buried, and they were also not on the shaggy top of Mona High. This could be the island of Anglesey, which is an island of the northwest coast of Wales, which too was inhabited by the Druids that Milton refers to earlier. So they were not on the steep, which is on the mountain. They were also not on top of the Mona High, nor yet where Deva spreads her wizard stream. And lastly, they were also not near Deva, which should be the river Dee that runs through Wales and England. So they were not in any of these places. I may, I fondly dream, had ye been there, for what could that have done? So this is a rhetorical question that we have here. A rhetorical question is given to us not to elicit a response, but to make us think in a certain manner. Milton knows that they wouldn't have been able to rescue Lycidas or help Lycidas, but just the helplessness is being pointed out here. Had ye been there, ye means you. You here refers to the nymphs. Had you been there, for what could that have done? So you won't have been able to do anything even if you were there. So he kind of consoles himself. What could the muse herself that Orpheus bore, the muse herself for her enchanting son, whom universal nature did lament, when by the rout that made the hideous roar, his gory visage down the stream was sent, down the swift Hebrus to the Lesbian shore. So, in this particular verse, you have the reference to the story of Calliope, which is one of the muses, and also her son Orpheus. The lines, it can be interpreted in this way. It could mean the muse that mothered Orpheus, whose death was mourned even by nature. Orpheus' death was mourned even by nature, and his gory visage means face which is covered with blood. It was sent to Hebrus river to reach the island of Lesbos. Hebrus is a river that runs through modern day Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. And Lesbian shore refers to the island of Lesbos, which is off the coast of Greece. So here you have the story of Orpheus being narrated here. It's a lengthy story. You can actually refer to it. You can Google it. And what Milton here means through his verse lines are even a muse could not save his son. So how can nymphs or goddesses or these deities save Lycidas? Alas, what boots it with incessant care to tend the homely slighted shepherd's trade and strictly meditate the thankless muse? The poet wonders what boots it, or what he would gain by continuing the shepherd's trade if the muse is not interested to help him out. So, here, by being a shepherd, he means being a poet. So, what use is it being a poet if the muse is not ready to inspire him, if the muse is not ready to help him? The muse could not help her own son. Calliope, who was Orpheus' mother, could not even save his son from death. So how must I think that the muses would help me? So why should I continue being a shepherd? Were it not better done as others use to sport with Amaryllis? Amaryllis is a shepherdess who appears in the works of several ancient pastoral poets like Virgil and Theocritus. So It was better to sport with Amaryllis in the shade or with tangles of Naira's hair. Naira is a nymph which is frequently alluded to in pastoral poetry. So I said at the very outset that there are a number of references. Milton alludes to numerous mythological figures as well as gods and goddesses which were present or which are present in Greek mythology as well as Roman mythology. So you have numerous characters appearing before us like Muse Calliope, Orpheus, and in this particular verse we have Amaryllis and Naira. So it was better to fiddle with Amaryllis, to play with Naira's hair. The question that the poet asks is, wouldn't it be better to sport with Amaryllis or the tangles of Naira's hair rather than continuing the life of a shepherd? So it would be better to write meager poems, petty poems rather than being a great poet. So if you are not ready to inspire me, Milton tells the muse, if you are not ready to inspire me, it would be better I leave this trade. I leave the business of writing poetry. Fame is the spur that the clear spirit doth raise, the last infirmity of noble mind, to scorn delights and live laborious days. So the only reason why we scorn delights means you give away or to look down upon, to contempt. We scorn delights and live laborious days. Laborious means toilsome, doing hard work, days during which you do so much hard work. And the only reason why we scorn delights and live laborious days is the prospect of fame. So it is fame that makes us live laborious days. Milton says, fame is the spur. Spur means anything that motivates or inspires us. So fame is the spur that the clear spirit doth raise, the last infirmity of noble mind. Infirmity means weakness. So fame is what allures into doing or makes you do hard work, makes you engage yourself in laborious things, to scorn delights and live laborious days. But the fair guerdon, when we hope to find and think to burst out into sudden blaze, comes the blind fury with the abhorred shears and slits the thin spun life. So Milton says that fame is what we seek when we do hard work, and it is a weakness of the noble mind. And when we reach a point where we think that we will receive a reward, guerdon means a reward. The blind fury, she comes out. He says she comes out with shears. Shears means scissors. Just as we think that we have found the fair guerdon or reward, the blind fury or fate comes to take it away with abhorred shears or scissors. So just as we think we have got it, no, fury or fate takes it away from us. But not the praise, Phoebus replied and touched my trembling ears. Phoebus is the Roman name of Apollo, who is the Greek god of sun, music, and poetry. And we have him in this particular scene, and he says that not all praise that we get for our achievements are destroyed by the fury. And he says this by touching his trembling ears, touching the poet's trembling ears. And this is a kind of admonishment. Phoebus is asking the poet to cool down. You don't have to blame the nymphs. You don't have to blame the fury. You don't have to blame the muse. Settle down, please. Relax, cool down. And that is why he holds on to or he touches his ears. A kind of admonishment. Phoebus replied and touched my trembling ears. Fame is no plant that grows on mortal soil, nor in the glistering foil, set off to the world, nor in broad rumor lies. So Phoebus says, he goes on to say that fame is not found in this mortal world, and also not in one's reputation or rumors. So where does fame lie? Let's see. But lives and spreads aloft by those pure eyes, and perfect witness of all judging Jove, as he pronounces lastly on each deed of so much fame in heaven except thy maid. So Phoebus, he continues to tell that fame actually lives and spreads as a result of Jove's decision. Jove I earlier stated that he is Jupiter, who is the Roman counterpart of Zeus, who is the king of all gods in Greek mythology. So, praise, fame, you get it because of Jove's decision or Jove's wish. He is the one who says the final word. It is Jove or Jupiter, or when you consider Greek mythology, Zeus, who gives everyone the fame they deserve. Made, we saw it earlier, it means a fitting reward. And it is Jove or Zeus who give fame to everyone. And that is what Phoebus, the Apollo, the god of sun and sciences. Yeah, the Roman name for Apollo, the Greek god of sun, music, and poetry. That is what Phoebus tells to Milton. So this is where we will stop for today. Thank you so much for being with me. I hope you got a proper introduction to John Milton as well as the poem. As I said earlier, there are a number of allusions that Milton makes. He was well versed in different languages, and he was also fluent with respect to mythology, the Greek as well as Roman mythology. So that makes this poem very rich with allusions. So it's important that perhaps go again through the verses that we have discussed today, so you'll have a perfect understanding of the verse lines. In the next video lesson, I will discuss the remaining stanzas.